It is a wild story, so let's get right into it. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the rise of a dictator, move into how the world catches fire, and then look at awakening the sleeping giant. From there, we'll track invading Fortress Europe, face the final devastating toll, and finally wrap up with breaking the cycle. All right, part 1, Rise of a Dictator, the catalyst of desperation. Because to really understand how the Second World War started, you actually have to look at exactly where the first one ended. So our story kicks off in November 1918 in a military hospital in Pasewalk, Germany. Picture this, okay? A 29-year-old corporal is lying in a bed, temporarily blinded by a British mustard gas attack. And when a chaplain comes in and announces that Germany has surrendered, this soldier just turns his face to the wall and weeps. His name? Adolf Hitler. He completely refused to believe Germany had lost, and instead he embraced this poisonous idea that they had been betrayed from within. And the context here is absolutely crucial. You see, the Treaty of Versailles had just totally humiliated Germany. It gutted their military and forced these massive reparations. So massive, in fact, that by 1923, German currency was literally cheaper to burn for heat than firewood. It's out of that crushing economic desperation that Hitler stepped up. He was this hypnotic speaker who ultimately managed to use the rules of democracy itself to legally seize absolute dictatorial power. Now, our sources really highlight the core of Hitler's strategy, and it was this. He was a gambler. He just repeatedly bet everything on one single conviction, that the rest of the world was simply too terrified of another massive war to stop him. In 1936, he militarized the Rhineland. France did nothing. In 1938, he annexed Austria. The world blinked again. He demanded a massive chunk of Czechoslovakia, and Britain and France practically handed it over in exchange for a promise of peace. Every single time he bet the world would blink, he was right. So he made his biggest bet yet. In 1939, he invaded Poland, backed by this shocking, totally secret non-aggression pact with his sworn ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin, basically agreeing to split the country between them. Which brings us to part 2. The world catches fire, Blitzkrieg and Britain standing alone. Because that final gamble in Poland, that's exactly what caused the world to catch fire. Britain and France finally drew a line in the sand and declared war. But here's the thing you have to realize. This new war was fundamentally different. The world showed up expecting a rematch of World War I, right? Static trenches, barbed wire, just sitting still in a grueling stalemate for months. But instead, Germany unleashed Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. We're talking tanks, dive bombers, and radio-coordinated troops moving at just relentless speeds. This fast-moving mechanic was so devastating that Poland fell in about 5 weeks. And France, a country that Germany couldn't conquer in 4 entire years during the First World War, they surrendered in just 6 weeks. So after this miraculous, desperate rescue of over 338,000 trapped Allied soldiers by civilian fishing boats at Dunkirk, Britain suddenly stood utterly alone. Hitler fully expected them to surrender, but Winston Churchill flat out refused. In response, Germany bombed British cities night after agonizing night. But Britain's young RAF fighter pilots, they rose to meet them again and again, incredibly handing Hitler his very first defeat of the war. It was this resilient defense that inspired Churchill's famous quote, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." Moving on to part 3, Awakening the Sleeping Giant, Pearl Harbor to Industrial Might. You know, while Europe was burning, the United States really wanted no part of another overseas war. But the conflict inevitably dragged America in, completely awakening the giant. Let's shift our focus over to the Pacific for a minute. Japan's empire was rapidly running out of oil, mainly because America had cut off their supply to punish their invasion of China. So to seize new oil territories, Japan felt they absolutely had to knock out the American Pacific Fleet first. Now, the man ordered to plan the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor was Isoroku Yamamoto. And ironically, he actually opposed going to war with the US. He made this incredibly chilling prediction to his government, warning, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." Keep that 6-month timeline in the back of your mind, because it's going to be very important. On Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the attack came. And the devastation was just absolute. The USS Arizona took a bomb directly to her ammunition magazine and exploded, killing 1,177 men in a matter of seconds. In under 2 hours, the entire Pacific Fleet was crippled. President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously called it a date which will live in infamy, and America immediately, decisively declared war on Japan. And then Hitler did something incredibly reckless, completely unprovoked. He declared war on the United States. He basically bet that America was soft and divided. Talk about a massive miscalculation. He instantly awakened a sleeping giant. America transformed literally overnight. Car factories instantly started building tanks. A staggering 16 million Americans put on a uniform. Millions of women entered the workforce to build the machines of war. The U.S. became a true arsenal of democracy, eventually getting to the point where they were cranking out a brand new warplane roughly every 5 minutes. Let that sink in. Okay, part 4. Invading Fortress Europe, Midway, and D-Day. With the U.S. now fully mobilized, the Allies had a monumental task, cracking open the Axis defenses, invading Fortress Europe, and turning the tide in the Pacific. Now, let's tie this back to Yamamoto's prediction. Remember his 6-month warning? Almost exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications, planning a huge trap at Midway. The Americans were clever, though. They confirmed the target by broadcasting a fake water shortage. Once they knew for sure, they reversed the trap entirely. In a single day, American dive bombers ambushed and sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Just like that, the tide in the Pacific had permanently turned. Meanwhile, back in Europe, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was managing the largest invasion force in human history, D-Day. Facing absolutely terrible weather, Ike had to make a gut-wrenching call on whether to launch the invasion of Normandy. The pressure on him was just immense. In fact, he actually scribbled a note and kept it hidden in his wallet, ready to be released to the press if the invasion failed. It read, "If any blame or fault attaches to this attempt, it is mine alone." That right there is the staggering burden of command. The D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, required this unbelievable, highly localized heroism. Take Utah Beach, for example, where the landing force drifted a full mile off target. 56-year-old General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the oldest man in the invasion, walking with a cane due to crippling arthritis, calmly surveyed the chaos while under enemy fire and just made the call. He said, "We'll start the war from right here." And he successfully redirected wave after wave of troops. It was a moment of incredible composure, a stark contrast to the absolute slaughterhouse happening just down the coast at Omaha Beach, where junior officers and ordinary soldiers literally had to claw their way up the bluffs just to survive. This brings us to part 5, the final devastating toll, the bulge and the atomic bomb. As the Allies broke out across Europe, the conflict entered its harrowing final stages, characterized by unthinkable horrors and really devastating calculations. By December 1944, Hitler launched one last, absolutely desperate winter gamble in the Ardennes forest, trying to split the Allied armies and creating a massive bulge in the lines. Outnumbered, freezing American troops, and we're talking guys who were cooks and clerks picking up rifles, they just refused to break. Apis Stone, surrounded Americans held the vital crossroads until General George Patton executed this frankly impossible 90-degree pivot with his entire army to race up and rescue them. But it came at a terrible cost. It was the largest and deadliest battle in U.S. Army history, costing over 19,000 American lives. And as those Allied forces finally pushed deep into Germany, they uncovered the agonizing truth of the Holocaust. They discovered the living nightmares of concentration camps like Buchenwald and Dachau. General Eisenhower was so sickened by what he saw that he actually forced himself to witness it personally. He then mandated strict documentation. He brought in cameras, journalists, and even local German civilians, ensuring that these atrocities were recorded as undeniable proof forever. He knew people would try to deny it, and he made sure they couldn't. Over in the Pacific, in April 1945, FDR passed away, and Harry Truman took office. He inherited a completely terrifying mathematical calculus. Based on the brutally bloody island battles at places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, military planners projected that a full mainland invasion of Japan would cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties and likely millions of Japanese lives. Faced with this genuinely impossible choice, Truman made the fateful decision to use a terrifying new weapon. He ordered the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to force a rapid end to the war. And finally, part 6, breaking the cycle, winning the peace. Because with the fighting finally over, the world faced an entirely new challenge: how to break this cycle of violence and ensure this unprecedented destruction never, ever happened again. The war officially came to an end on the deck of the USS Missouri in September 1945, But man, when the global smoke finally cleared, the death toll was almost beyond human comprehension. An estimated 70 to 85 million people were dead. To put that into perspective, that was roughly 3% of every single human being alive on Earth at the time. Just staggering. But here's where our source material highlights a really profound shift in what happened next. Instead of demanding crushing reparations and repeating that toxic cycle of revenge that happened after World War I in 1919, America actually took a completely different path. They passed the GI Bill to send veterans to college, which basically built the modern American middle class. The United Nations was founded specifically to prevent future global conflicts. And perhaps most remarkably of all, they spent billions to help rebuild defeated nations like Germany and Japan, eventually turning them into some of the closest allies we have today. It was a massive geopolitical shift that completely changed what the world was. The Allies didn't just win a war, they actively worked to win the peace. Which leaves us with this final, really important question to consider. How did transforming bitter enemies into close allies forever alter our global blueprint for peace? It's a huge testament to breaking the cycle of vengeance, and it fundamentally built the modern world we live in right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.